Hello and welcome to a brand new Arseblog Arsecast right here on arseblog.com. How are you? Hope you're well. Thank you very much indeed, as always, for being here. As you can hear, my voice still hasn't properly recovered from my weekend in London. Still a bit croaky, but hey, we'll get through it because we have got football to talk about. Arsenal were in Champions League action last night against Dinamo Zagreb. A 3-0 win puts us into third place in the Champions League table, more or less assures our place in the knockout stages without having to play any more annoying games. So that's not to be sniffed at all, particularly when you look a bit further down the table and you see some of the teams lurking there, like, Man City. You got to take a little time just to appreciate where we are and what we've done in Europe so far this season. Anyway, let's get on with the show and let's get into the nuts and bolts of last night. And we'll talk a bit about transfers, we'll talk a bit about injuries, and we'll talk a bit about strikers as well as the game. And with me to do all that from the Gunner Talk TV, it is Tom Canton. Good morning, Tom.
Good morning, mate. How are you?
I'm good. I'm looking out the window here and there's a lot going on. So for you guys over there, by the time this comes out, you might want to batten down the hatches because it's going to come across this country and head towards yours. But it's anything but a rainy day in the hearts of Arsenal fans after a 3-0 win in the Champions League last night, put us up into third place in the table and basically assured us of qualification for the knockout rounds without having to go through that extra round of games. And when you look at some of the stats in the Champions League this season, we've yet to concede a goal from open play. I did see a stat from Opta, which I had up on my screen, but it's gone now, but it's an impressive stat as well about goals conceded. We've been good in the Champions League this season. That's what I'm trying to say. And it's sort of, I'm not going to say it's at odds with what's gone on in the Premier League, because I think generally we've been okay. We've been verging on good in the Premier League, but a little below expectations. But in the Champions League, a tournament that we've spent quite a number of years out of until last season, I think it's worth just reflecting on how well we've done in this group stage.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's been a nice distraction from kind of we've put so much expectation on the Premier League and this build-up of angst and kind of feeling that this has got to be the year. But obviously things have gone maybe slightly against us. But our consistency in the Champions League, which was, in many ways not an easy run that we were given, trips to Atalanta, trips to Inter Milan, to Sporting, who at the time, despite changing their coach and since that point has gone slightly downhill for them. Ironically, the same for the team their coach has joined. But I think when you look at the Champions League, it's been an escape and a welcome one, and one that's given us opportunities to put some, I guess, skeletons in the closet to bed. The European away performance at Sporting, we needed that, I think, and that will help us in the knockout rounds as well. And we've kind of got to a point where we've taken the pressure off of ourselves with 2 games to go, including last night's, against 2 sides who, at least with respect to them on paper, you'd be hoping to progress through relatively comfortably. And when you look at some of the other big European sides that haven't done that, Manchester City, of course, in a very perilous position, PSG having to get that result themselves, Real Madrid, Bayern Munich, looking like they could end up in a playoff game as well. Well, Arsenal have avoided that. Well, I mean, Arteta was told in the press conference last night it's 100%. We were doing the maths in the press lounge afterwards, and apparently it's 99.96 or something % chance Arsenal are through. But yes, the Champions League has been a very positive thing for us this season. Yeah,
that 0.04% is worrying me now that you mention it. But look, that could be my issue. I mean, I think you have to look at the game against PSG, for example, after they did what they did against Manchester City, who were 2-0 up last night and ended up losing 4-2, which warms the heart of everybody listening, I'm sure. That's a really good result. It was a penalty away at Inter that saw us go down. Here's the stat. It actually came from Orbinho. Arsenal have kept 8 clean sheets in their last 9 Champions League games at the Emirates Stadium. So there is a little bit of a platform there. I can't remember who it was, but somebody in the build-up to one of our Champions League games this season described Arsenal as the best defensive team in the world. I'm not sure that's 100% 100% true, but it's certainly a very big strength of ours. It was evident again last night with another clean sheet, and after what has been a very difficult period. This was Arsenal's 7th game in 21 days, 120 minutes in the FA Cup and North London Derby, a game against Villa which didn't go the way we wanted but was difficult. We kept going. It was physically quite draining. He did have to make some changes. I thought it was quite interesting to see, for example, Jakub Kiwior playing at the centre of the defence with Gabriel, because in the pre-game press conference, he was asked a little bit of a question about, could Kiwior play there? It was sort of about left-footed players playing in right-footed positions, and he was giving nothing away at all. Whether he was pretending to not quite understand the question or not, I don't know, but he was basically saying, well, his position is left centre-half. That's where we play him. But he came in last night. Zinchenko came in, and we'll talk about Lewis-Skelly in a moment. There was a start for Raheem Sterling. There was a start for Jorginho. So it is one of those games where I think he had to freshen things up. He had to give players minutes, and he had to look after a couple of the players who started on the bench.
Yeah, without question. And it's been the first game for what feels like forever that we've really been able to do that, with the draw that we were given in the FA Cup and the difficulty of a tie against Newcastle in the League Cup. It's felt like that these players have just, while dealing with injury and illness, have just had to keep on putting in performance after performance every 3 days. So this game was a respite that was certainly desired by the club and by the players themselves. And it was a good opportunity, I think, to see what some of the players are actually, capable of that we've not seen too much of. Zinchenko, I really enjoyed his performance, for example, but Jorginho, for me, stood out perhaps the most. And there's been some rumours and links with, a move to Brazil during this winter window. And I can't think of a justification of why Arsenal would allow that to happen.
Unless they were going to bring in another midfielder, there's no way that should be sanctioned. I agree with you.
And I don't know who you would bring in with talk of Martin Zubimendi, for the summer, and this idea that he's probably going to be the inheritor to the number 6 role moving forwards. Who are you going to bring in that's going to give you in these 6 months what Jorginho can give you in the the fits and spurts that we use him for? So I think that would be mad. But yeah, I think the performances of those two did stand out. You're right to bring up the Jakub Kiwior press conference. We had after that concluded, it was Jordan Campbell from The Athletic who asked the question. Yeah. There was a couple of kind of nudges on the shoulder of Jordan. It was a really good back and forth between the two. I mean, after the game yesterday, I had a bit of a back and forth with Arteta about the stat that Kai Havertz, we'll come on to, I'm sure, later on. Yeah. But Arteta, I think, is warming to this back and forth in press conferences a bit more, which is more enjoyable, I think. We're not just being in there, but witnessing them as well. And
sure.
I think that there is a lot to be said about some of the selections this season and how that's impacted us this season. But last night, it was good to get fresh legs in, and it was good to give them the opportunity to show what they could do. And I think for the most part, they did.
They did. I think for the most part, that is true. So one of the features of Arsenal last season, and I think in some ways the season before, what made us kind of exciting, if that's the right way of putting it, or which sort of got people really invested in games early, was the fact that we scored a lot of early goals. We scored goals quickly in games very often, and that, I think, has an impact on how you as a fan, whether it's an away game, a home game, feel about what your team is capable of doing on the day. When you go like half an hour, 40 minutes without scoring, is a bit like, you start to get a little bit antsy, but those early goals calm you down, settle you down, and we got one of those last night. I thought it was a really well-worked goal. Gabriel Martinelli down the left. I thought the layoff from Kai Havertz was excellent. Declan Rice in the right place at the right time to smash it home and make it 1-0 inside 2 minutes. I'm sure you've seen the TNT Sports interview that he did, in which he talked about how the manager has been hard on the players, hard on the midfielders, because he wants them to get into the box and to be there for those kinds of opportunities. And we saw a couple of midfielders score a goal last night. Martin Odegaard got one right at the death, but it was about him chasing into the box in the 90-odd minute, whatever it was, about putting in that effort, about stepping forward those 5-10 yards that you need to step forward, and that paid dividends last night with the opening goal.
Absolutely. It was a lovely cross on that left-hand side, very Trossard-esque against Villa from Martinelli, putting that into kind of a plate for Havertz, who this time, instead of finishing as he did against Villa, setting up Declan Rice for a storming half volley that gave the goalkeeper absolutely no chance whatsoever. And we have needed more goals this season. And you look at kind of the records that we've broken in the previous two successive campaigns. I think it's 88 goals in 23-24, and then was it 91 last season? They were record-breaking seasons for goal scoring, and that came a lot from what goals like Martin Odegaard has provided us, and that has not been as present this season. We signed Mikel Moreno as a player who, in terms of attacking touches in the opposition penalty area for Real Sociedad, was up there amongst the best in Europe. He's not necessarily been able to provide that for whatever reason. I think in part, obviously, the injuries that he suffered at the beginning, the transition to a new team, but also transition to a new league and a new setup. But that will come, I think, and we're starting to see that now with two midfielders, you rightly point out, scoring last night. I think the goal for Martin Odegaard at the end, of course, is huge for him personally, but Rice is going to be this guy that progresses maybe into a number 8 role for the long term. We hinted a second ago mentioning about the Jorginho Zubimendi situation. It seems that the number 8, and that goes against what I actually thought might happen. I really did think that Rice's future would be effectively becoming Arsenal's own Rodri, for example, and that doesn't seem to be where Arteta views him, and we therefore need him when he's playing in that box-to-box 8 role to be a threat in the box, to get in there and show that ability to score. I remember that goal that he scored for... You remember the goal he scored for West Ham in the Conference League, where he kind of ran the length of the field and finished really well? We've not really seen that Declan Rice, for us, but maybe those are some of the traits that we need to start seeing a little bit more of. He does love to drive with the ball, and he does like to progress play and transition play really well. And if that is to be his future, I think he's definitely got plenty of ability to do. Do you see that as kind of his future?
I'm sort of like you in that I assumed that when he was signed that he was going to be the long-term guy at 6, and then we might do something else in the sort of the midfield further forward, the famed left 8 and things like that. I thought the Zubimendi links were really interesting because he's a really good player, and I think any team in Europe would be more than happy to have him. And if we can get that player in, I think he absolutely makes us stronger. There is obviously a knock-on effect then for Rice and where he plays. And my gut feeling on this is that Arteta doesn't want to restrict Rice as just a 6 or just an 8. I think he sees him as such an all-rounder that he provides versatility and depth in a number of midfield positions, or at least those 2 midfield positions. Like, you could see him easily play as a double pivot alongside Zubimendi if that's what they wanted to do. We've seen him operate as a left 8 and do well. I think, for me, I can't escape the feeling that we're only beginning to see Declan Rice at his right level now, after what was a long, grueling season for West Ham the season before, a long, grueling season for Arsenal, went all the way with England. We know he's had some injury issues, a broken toe. I think like many players this season, he has suffered from that post-Euros fatigue. Far from the only one. It's in more focus for us as he's playing for us week in, week out. But I think there are signs maybe over the last couple of weeks that he is beginning to get back to his best level. And I think there may well be, because of injuries and other things that go on with this squad, as a matter of course, there are going to be games where he's going to play as the 8. But there are going to be games where we need him to play as the 6, because maybe Thomas Partey is needed elsewhere, maybe Jorginho is needed. So I don't think he wants to restrict Declan Rice in any way, rather than just say, okay, you are now the 6, and that is the only position you can play for this team.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that you look at the minutes that he's been saved with this season. He was on the bench against Forest. He was on the bench against Brentford a few weeks ago. He was on the bench, I think, against Crystal Palace as well. Those opportunities to just give him a break and get freshness back. And as you mentioned, he has suffered a bit of a niggling injury as well that he's been dealing with. And when you play as much football as Declan Rice has, that's just to be expected.
Yeah.
We talk a lot about, overplaying the likes of Bukayo Saka, and that his injury was a ticking time bomb. But ultimately, the best teams in the world play their best players the majority of the time, if not all of the time. Mohamed Salah plays all of the time when he's available for Liverpool, barring one or two. And that's what we're doing with the likes of Declan Rice as well. And it is in part, well, it's not in part, it's more than in part, it's the schedule is the biggest factor in that. But it's the demands of Arsenal being a team that are expected to challenge for titles and win trophies that put us into a position where we can't really afford to give players the calibre of Declan Rice much of a rest, if ever. And not only that, but linking back to yesterday's result, putting us effectively through, and of course being, not wantingly, but unfortunately out of the FA Cup, there's going to be that opportunity for players like Rice. And even though Saka is out at the moment, they're going to get that opportunity to have a break, have some freshness, get away from things and reset. And that will be hugely beneficial for the likes of Rice moving forward.
Yeah. It does look as if they're going to try and do something in terms of a warm weather trip, whether it's Dubai, whether it's south of Spain, who knows where they'll end up.
Can I come, please?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, just invite yourself along, Tom. They'll be fine with it. Don't worry. Now, until the second goal went in, I think there are some interesting aspects in this game that probably feed into some of the concerns or frustrations or worries that people have about this Arsenal team. Because with all due respect, I don't think Dinamo Zagreb were very good. We dominated the game. There were chances to score. We didn't quite make the most of some of the chances. There was a Gabriel header, if you remember, that he put wide where you would expect him to score. Rice had a shot blocked. It was a good pass from Odegaard. There was a Havertz header. I think it was a Zinchenko cross from the left, and he just got his header wrong, put it wide. There was a Martinelli shot, where it sort of ran across Odegaard and he ran onto it, and it's one of those where you're going, just put it like a foot either side of the goalkeeper and that's going to go in because of the way he was set. So, between the goal and the end of the first half, I think we played okay. But again, you're just sort of looking at that cutting edge in attack, which I think is probably the key issue or the key worry that people have about this side.
Yeah, and it's it's rightful to be that frustrated, because we know the potential of the goal-scoring abilities of this team in terms of how many chances it does create. And we're not taking those opportunities when they come. Now, teams, I think, have got, less so Dinamo, but in the bigger kind of picture, teams have got better at defending against what we produce. And that definitely needs to be factored in. But we do always get the sense that we are that elite finisher away from unlocking what is the potential of Mikel Arteta's Arsenal. Now, whether that can arrive in January or in the summer remains to be seen. But last night, what we saw was a side that, again, can create plenty of chances. But when it gets to the key moment, they're not always can be relied upon to finish those opportunities. I think it was important that players like Odegaard and Havertz and even Rice, to an extent, scored, and that Martinelli got an assist, and that will lift their confidence. Because I think the biggest thing with this team is, I don't even think it's ability, because we have a really good team. We have a really good collection of players. I think it is all very much in the mindset and the mentality. But when you talk about words like mentality, you start to go off different tangents and think, well, there's not really a mentality issue. Look at the team. They've competed for the title for the last 2 seasons. They've had some really big knocks this year that are out of their control. They're still competing for the title. They're second in the league. They're third in the Champions League. So their mentality must be strong enough, but it's just in those moments when they need to make those key decisions in the high pressure points of a game that it's not quite clicking. And when it does click, and I think it will click this season, especially when some players like Saka, for instance, start to come back, or even the influence of a player like Nwaneri returning to the team, I think will bring confidence to the side. And seeing young players like Lewis-Skelly stepping up also adds to that confidence that, we really can achieve some really big things. But we need players like Martinelli to be continuous in their form of goal scoring, and he's had some very good games recently. Trossard as well has had some very big moments coming off the bench to make his 100th appearance, and obviously set up that goal for Martin Odegaard with a slight fortuitous deflection. But it's important that those players do contribute, because Trossard scored 17 goals last season, which is a really good tally for a player that is not necessarily a guaranteed starter every single game. And that has not been able to be replicated so far this season. Odegaard as well, that season he scored 15 odd goals in a campaign. I think Arteta was asked about it in a previous press conference, and he said something on the lines of, you can't expect an attacking midfielder to deliver 15 goals every single season. But I think we can demand him to score more than he has done this season, based upon the level of quality we know that Odegaard has at his disposal. So, yes, a lot's gone against us that is out of our control, but there are a lot of things such as finishing that we do need to take countership for, that if we do get right, can see that coiled spring unleashed. For
sure. We will talk about transfers and the January window in a second, but the best thing any of us can hope for right now is that the players that we have can deliver a bit more and that they can step up and find the assists and find the passes and find the goals and find the back of the net. So we'll come to Kai Havertz now in just a second. But I think there was something else about the first part of the second half, which, again, you know, I was looking at it going, oh, guys, come on. So there was this passage of play. I'm sure you remember this. Passage of play where we were keeping the ball inside the Dinamo Zagreb half. We were passing it across and passing it back. It was mostly towards the left-hand side. And after about 60 to 90 seconds of passing back and, you know, going back and stretching the play a little bit, we eventually found a pass which saw Zinchenko get beyond his midfield man and have space to either run into or play a ball into or play a pass into or provide a cross from. And rather than use that space that we had worked so hard to create with all those passes, which I assume is the point of all those passes, right? To create space for somebody to do something in. He checked back and we started again. And I think I'm with you. I thought Zinchenko was pretty tidy last night, did well. But moments like that are things where I think if they're doing the video analysis of this game, they've got to be saying, look, you've got to use that. We worked really hard. We played 50 passes to get the ball into you in that position, and you've just come back, and now we have to do it all over again. And that, I think, leads into the frustration of, you know, how we feel about this team sometimes. And then you see what Martinelli did for the second goal. It was like, oh, look what he did. He did something different. He just tried something a little bit different. Was it complicated? Maybe a little bit. You know, you have to take the ball on, you have to keep it under control, you have to move at pace, and you have to deliver a really good ball while running across the penalty area. But the reward was a really excellent cross from Gabriel Martinelli, a very good header from Kai Havertz, and it's 2-0. And those are the small things. I'm not saying like, just do that. You know what I mean? That's far too simplistic. But I think there are aspects of the way that we play, which I'm not saying we're inhibited, but I think we just need maybe to take just a little chance every now and again, because the reward can be the goal, which more or less makes the game safe.
Yeah. Yeah, so two things on this. I think the first one, I think to the Aston Villa game and that pass that Miles Lewis-Skelly made right at the end through the lines in the left half space.
Yeah.
Brilliant pass, and credit to Miles Lewis-Skelly for making that. But again, it was at the end of the game that pass came about, and we'd had 90-odd minutes before that where that pass wasn't really being attempted or being made, or for whatever reason the runs weren't happening. I was watching Kai Havertz a lot last night because obviously when you're in the press box, you've got a much kind of lower view than compared to you on the television screen. So it's harder to see the bigger spaces opening up, especially on the far side of the pitch. And so typically what I tend to do is watch the attempted runs. And if you just watch Kai Havertz, and maybe it's a part of his game that is underestimated, he kept making runs, run after run after run after run.
I saw that in the Villa game as well, yeah.
Jorginho found him in the box at one point with a great pass over the top, and it nearly created a very good opportunity for us. And you're thinking, you see what the outcome of that type of ball, that difference, that variation in our attack, to do something a little bit more imaginative can have. And then we don't do it again. And you're questioning, well, why don't they do it again? You mentioned the Martinelli cross, which was the second point. Kai Havertz missed that horrendous chance against Manchester United because of a cross, I think from Martin Odegaard, where he checks back to his left and whips one in, similar to Martinelli on the left side last night, and Havertz is on the end of it and sadly just puts it over the bar and should have scored. So it shows you the danger that you can create from these kind of incisive, whipped-in crosses. They're really difficult for opposition defenders to defend, especially when they're put in, like Martinelli did, at a certain height, where you've got a player like Havertz who can leap above them, and all he needs to do is get any touch, and it will go in the back of the net, as we saw last night. So the variation in our attack and the directness and the risk factor of our attack needs to be improved. I think there's this sense of fear when we attack sometimes, that you don't want to be the guy that gives the ball away. You don't want to be the guy that's sinned by Mikel Arteta making a mistake, because you know, I can't imagine what it's like to be playing a match of football where your manager is Mikel Arteta looking, staring at you as you're trying to make the right choices. It must be very intimidating. It's something that players will have to transition to and adapt to. But there is that sense that there's a fear sometimes of being the guy that makes the error, makes the mistake. I mean, Kivior did one, at the back. Timber did one at the back last night as well. And you're thinking, when you've seen those mistakes happen early in the game and the frustrations and what that does to the crowd in the Emirates as well, when we don't quite make the right pass, because the crowd can get on you so quickly at times, that, there is a fear factor of not making that pass, because if you make that pass and get it wrong, suddenly your player rating from the game gets a notch down, because it'll be so-and-so played this pass and it didn't reach their target. But I'd rather we looked at it in a more positive sense of, they attempted this pass. They tried to create something that was going to change the game in a positive sense for us. Yes, it didn't come off, but we need to keep trying rather than just playing this suffocating football around a box that's not necessarily killing off the opponent.
Sure. So let's talk Kai Havertz for a second then, because he's had a difficult couple of weeks, it's fair to say. In the cup games in particular, I think he would admit that he was below the standards that you would expect from not just him, but an Arsenal centre-forward. But he got a goal against Villa on Saturday. He has an assist and a goal last night. He's up to 14 goals in the Premier League this season, in all competitions rather this season. In the Champions League, in 7 games, he has 4 goals and 2 assists. Now, I know and I understand, and I'm sure you do, and I'm sure everybody listening understands why there is a lot of discussion, debate around Kai Havertz. My feeling on this is that Kai Havertz is not the problem, per se. The issue is we don't have something else to work with or in place of Kai Havertz. We need Kai Havertz, but we need Kai Havertz +1. And that +1 is not there this season. You could make the argument that until the injury, it could be Bukayo Saka, because those two actually work together really well. There is focus on what kind of forward we might bring in January, and we could talk about that in just a moment's time. But what's your sense of what Havertz is bringing to the team, and that wider discussion about him, whether he's, people say he's not the right guy or he's not good enough to be the guy to do this or whatever. My feeling is we've got a guy who, since he moved to centre forward, is scoring and assisting at a pretty decent rate, especially in comparison with other players in the Premier League and in comparison with some of the players that we have been linked with, that his numbers match up or are even better than those guys. So for me, it's not him on his own. It's the fact that he's asked to do maybe a bit too much.
Yes. I asked Arteta after the game, I said, Kai Havertz has reached 14 goals, 22 matches faster than he did in the previous season. And he asked me, which I wasn't expecting, he said, what do you think that means? What do you think that shows? And I kind of panicked in that moment because I'm sitting there thinking, I'm the guy asking the questions. And I said, well, it shows that improvement, doesn't it? And he said, well, it shows perception against the reality. And the perception of Kai Havertz is that, as you said there in that question, that he's not good enough, or he's not the required level, or he's not what we need to go to that next step to the title. But the reality is that Kai Havertz is a good player, and that he will score goals for you, and he will score goals for you at a decent rate as well if he's put in that position. And if you put in midfield, he won't score to that rate, but he will contribute in other ways, and he will improve the team in other aspects. But you're right, we need a +1 to Havertz. We need Havertz. We need somebody who's better than Gabriel Jesus. We need somebody that's definitely better than Raheem Sterling when Bukayo Saka is not there. We need that extra in that forward line so that Kai Havertz, it's not, the conversation is just not closed on him, and that it's a broader context around that player individually. I think that what Arsenal are so fearful of, obviously, with that scenario is getting in the wrong guy to go with Kai Havertz, and there's always a patience and a reluctance to take a risk. But I don't want to move too far away from Havertz on this, because I think it's so important that and I listened to Elliot talking on Sophie's show on the Highbury Squad about this, and Elliot said there's this weird dynamic in social view of football today, which is either you're crap or you're the GOAT, and there's nothing in between. In realities, there's a spectrum of quality of players. And if you're not at a club like Arsenal the GOAT, you're immediately just chucked in this kind of category of not good enough. And the reality is that Havertz is not going to be, and ever, with respect to him, he's not going to be on the levels of centre forwards that we long him to be. I just never see him getting to that level. But I do see him being to a level that is very contributory to us, that is going to give us a significant number of help in terms of goals and assists and collaboration and competitiveness in the forward line and depth in not just the centre forward position but other positions. And that is useful. But you're right, it's not him. It's not his fault. He should not be getting, in my view, the brunt of the frustration and angst that there is around the centre forward role. Yes, I think we can be scrutinising at times when he misses chances that he shouldn't miss, and the Man United game and the Newcastle game are definitely examples of that. But we also need to be taking a step back and looking at the bigger picture of that position and recognise as well that he can be even better, but we need to go and get it. I don't know if the right comparison is maybe to look at he's the Daniel Sturridge to Luis Suarez, and we haven't got our Luis Suarez. I don't know if it's a case of playing a player alongside him.
That's a high bar, isn't it?
It's a high bar, but I think we need a high bar.
Sure, no. I'm not saying I'd be against it. It is just that those players are more rare. But yeah, I know what you mean. Maybe there are shades of Olivier Giroud in him as well, in the sense that he was reliable. He got you a certain amount of goals every season, pretty much every season. Did he miss some chances? Yes. Was he the best centre forward in the world? Absolutely not. And everyone, while we had Giroud, who was essentially, right, a 20-goal-a-season striker. That is what Olivier Giroud was for his time at Arsenal. And I think that's kind of what Kai Havertz is, although I think maybe he has the ability to go a little bit further. But that longing for the 30, 35 goal a season man that every Arsenal fan has is, I think it's hardwired into us. We've seen some of those players down the years who can score that at that level, and you're like, I just want one of those. Just give me another one of those. But they are, really, really hard to find. So
who is it for you? I want to press you on it. Do you see it? Is it there
in the market? I mean, Isak is the one, right? Isak is the name that we're linked with, that if you had to bank on a player, if you had to put your house on a player who's in the market, I mean, I don't even think he's in the market, but, as somebody who's been linked with us, if you had to put your house on a player who could get you 30 goals a season in this Arsenal team, he would be the one. I don't see it from the other names, and we'll talk about those in a second. Do you?
Yeah, I agree. I think that the unicorn, I don't see it being bought. I agree when I listen to James on here talk about we aren't going to buy Mohamed Salah as Mohamed Salah is now, but we can buy Mohamed Salah as he was at Roma.
It's about identifying that player. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Anyway, we'll see what happens. We'll come back to transfers in a moment. You mentioned something there a second ago about getting somebody who's better than Raheem Sterling in the absence of Bukayo Saka. I think we have him in Ethan Nwaneri. The difference in just movement. There was a moment when we brought the ball forward. After he'd come on, Sterling had got booked and Timber got booked, so he brought on Partey and Nwaneri, and good to see him back from injury and maybe a little sooner than people had expected. But we brought the ball forward, and Odegaard was expecting him to make a run, I think, and play the ball behind the defender. It almost went out for a goal kick to Dinamo Zagreb. But Nwaneri put the burners on and kept the ball in. And just when I look at how he moves versus how, I know he's 30 years of age now, or however old he is, 31, Raheem Sterling, the difference in the way those two guys move is marked. And what those guys look like they can contribute is marked as well, because I think he should have an assist to his name. I think Declan Rice should give half of his goal bonus to Ethan Nwaneri's assist bonus, right? Because he should plant that header. He should put that in the back of the net, because it's a brilliant ball in from the right-hand side. Not dissimilar to the kind of ball that Martinelli played in for Havertz, but Rice obviously gets the header all wrong. I thought it was quite funny on TNT Sports. He was asked about, what does it feel like to score your first Champions League goal? And he went, I'm so annoyed, because he couldn't stop thinking about the one that he missed. But I think in Nwaneri, we have the player who potentially can stand in the short term for Bukayo Saka. And if there's discussion of pecking order after another kind of sad and indifferent and ineffectual performance from Raheem Sterling, I think you have to put Nwaneri higher than him in the pecking order and pick your teams accordingly.
Yeah, I've been trying to think of what I think the correct word to describe the difference in when I watched those two, when I watched the two performances. I've landed on desire, I think, as a word when you're looking at them on the ball. And when you look at when there's a loose ball, for instance, what's the desire to go and not just grab that ball and win it first, but then to what you do next with it. I've always felt like Sterling, not just at Arsenal, but in general, has been a player that's always held onto the ball one touch too long, or two touches or three touches too long. Yeah. Whereas Nwaneri, for a player so young, has got such an immediacy to how he looks up so often to see where and who is around him. And the cross for Rice it's Odegaard-esque is how I would describe it. And it was very similar to the chances I mentioned earlier that Odegaard created for Havertz against Manchester United. And I think that shows you, and also Arteta's words in the press conference. In fact, I think I've got the quote. He said, he's been training really good the last few days. He's adapting to the position, and you can tell straight away the threat that he generates, how convinced people that kind of ball that they can put on these areas as well. So I'm really, really happy for his good impact. And that shows you that there is an intent to kind of transition him to more of maybe a right-sided player during this period that Bukayo Saka is out. Maybe also to give him some more opportunities to play in a front three, whether that's when Saka returns, he could move to maybe even the left-hand side at times. It's not beyond all doubt that could happen because a player so young, there's a large amount of specialisation that still needs to take place. So I think it's a great experience for him. And I think that certainly when you mention the pecking order, there's no doubt if you spoke to 100 Arsenal fans, 100 Arsenal fans tell you that Nwaneri comes in ahead of Sterling. It's not debatable. Because not only is there the idea that he's there for the long term and Sterling's a loanee, but just because he's better. He's just, for me, a better player at this very moment in time. I'm not talking about in general across careers. That's very different. But right as of this moment, Ethan Nwaneri is better than Raheem Sterling. And you might say, or some might say, that's because of how poor Sterling has been. But I like to look at the context of this is a 17-year-old that's making his first breakout season, and he's already better than Raheem Sterling, not at 35, but Raheem Sterling at 30. So I think it's a really good scenario for him, and I think that injury against Brighton, it was interesting. Arteta said in the press conference after Brighton, he said he was kind of asking the question, I don't know, what is it? He was really kind of concerned, Nwaneri. It sounded very honest in how he described that feeling. And for a youngster to have your first kind of, not big injury, but just an injury that stops you and your momentum, stops you in your tracks almost, when you've got all the world going for you, you're playing games, you're starting, you're scoring, and then something out of your control stops you. How you then come back from that, even a few weeks out, can be really telling of character. And if we saw last night his character, we've got a lot to be excited about.
No, completely agree. And there was one really impressive defensive contribution as well, where the game got a bit stretched towards the end. I think they won a corner, but he basically chased back 60, 70 yards. I think one of the things we don't talk about with regards to Nwaneri enough is his pace. I think he's much quicker than people think. So it was impressive to see him display that last night. Should have had an assist. In the end, the game made comfortable by that Martin Odegaard goal. Not the most difficult goal he will ever score, but it is his first open play goal this season, his first open play goal for quite a while. Listen, I know the opposition weren't great. I think we do have to look at what the positives are from this game without going overboard on them or anything like that. I think Odegaard getting on the score sheet from open, you could see it actually meant a lot. As he put the ball in the net, he was like, I'm just like, dude, it's like you've just made the game completely safe. It's an icing on the cake kind of goal. It's not that important, but I think it was important for him when a player goes through a spell like that where they don't score. It becomes an issue, it becomes a burden, it becomes a weight on your mind. And I think he, hopefully will have rid himself of some of that burden going forward. Because as you said a bit earlier on, he is certainly capable of more than we've seen from him this season.
Yeah, you said it was the icing on the cake. Well, it was the cake for Odegaard, that goal. It was, because it meant everything getting that goal. He has been our player of the season, I think, voted for the last 2 successive seasons. In 2 campaigns where Arsenal not just competed for a title, but surprised everybody. You know, the first season that we did it was a massive surprise, and his contributions in that season in particular were of an elite level. And not having him as kind of good as he has been is impactful, as Bukayo Saka's absence has been to us, because they are that important to what Arsenal do. And also, it's not just what he does on the ball. As captain, you want your captain to be in really good form from a mental standpoint. And if your captain's kind of having, not necessarily, I don't know, go as far as saying doubts in his performances, but certainly, you know, frustrations to the point where you're getting that third goal and you're celebrating the way it does, it shows you the relief, it shows you the weight that he perhaps has been carrying these last few weeks. And he's had to do so in a side where he doesn't really have any chance for rotation, because there isn't. We've loaned out Fabio Vieira, which I don't think was the wrong decision to do. And I think there was a view that Ethan Nwaneri would come in perhaps and do that, but maybe the injury at the start of the season came much earlier than they were ever prepared for. And then, of course, the illness comes around as well. And then Nwaneri starts getting opportunities, but then Saka gets injured. So he's then kind of moved out to that side. And Odegaard has had to carry a weight of some poor form, which all good players will go through at some stage. And he has had to deal with that, while I don't know if you've seen this, and it probably is just the chaos of social media, but it's such like a reactive nature to start thinking about captaincy. I've seen some supporters suggest, which I think is nuts, to start considering that just because he's had a dip in form, that we should start having some consideration about that. This is where you need to be getting behind your players as a collective. And if we want them to deliver us a title, we need to be unified when those players perhaps are at a lower point during a form, and think back to what they are capable of doing. And we know that Odegaard is capable of some very, very impressive things. So when he showed that desire to get in the box and finish that opportunity and gamble, because there's so little about this team that are gamblers at the moment. We need more gamblers in this team. In the footballing sense only. And we need them to get into those positions to score, and Odegaard did that, and that was really good to see.
I'm just trying to imagine this like Arsenal team going for a bonding event at a casino and just standing around the roulette table and nobody betting on anything. Stick or twist when you're playing pontoon.
Put 10 on black and 10 on red and see what
exactly.
happens. Yeah.
So look, it was an important win, and it gives us a bit of safety blanket going into the final game in this qualification period, this weird new format of the Champions League against Girona next week. We're away in Girona, who are right down the bottom on 3 points, along with teams like Red Bull Salzburg, Sturm Graz, RB Leipzig. We might talk about them in a moment as well in relation to a particular player. But an important win, no fuss, no drama, no scandals. Didn't have to overexert ourselves physically after what has been a difficult period. We're I'm not saying we coasted through the game, but we did enough. We held them at arm's length. They didn't have a shot on target. I can't remember a game when David Raya has had to do less. A few goal kicks, a few kicks, one cross I think he claimed in the second half that was a decent cross. Apart from that, he was a spectator. We could have put that 14-year-old in goal again and it probably would have been all right, So, I mean, in just overall to sort of round that out, after that Villa game and going into an away game at Wolves on Saturday, I feel like all of those things I mentioned, plus bringing a few players in and being able to rotate and still do that, I think overall, a positive night. It's not one that's going to go down in history as one of the great nights or anything like it, but at this moment in time, it felt like just what we needed.
Oh, yeah. I mean, we kind of come full circle, haven't we? Because I mentioned at the start, the Champions League has been a nice escape, but it's also been an opportunity to re-astound ourselves with what we can achieve, what goals we can score, with what form we can create, with the wins we can put together. I've described Arsenal at times as a bit of a defibrillator for rivals in how they've kind of revived careers of players like Bruno Fernandes during periods where he's not been great. Well, the Champions League has been a bit of a defib for us at times, I think, and it's brought us back to reality and given us that boost that we've needed, and hopefully that can take us into the Wolves game this weekend with momentum and with assurance in our finishing, in particular for our current centre-forward, Kai Havertz, as we've discussed. But yeah, being able to look at that table, knowing you've got one game to go and you are 99.94% there, is a nice feeling, especially when you can look to some of your rivals, particularly some that you thought maybe in Man City that would be challenging you more tightly for the title this season, that they are still having not just work to do to compete for the top 8, but for the top 24.
Yeah.
And that's the danger of this new competition. I'm not a fan of the expansion in terms of the extra games of players, because I think it's mental how many games they play already. But I think that there's been a couple of advantages to this type of competition. That said, I don't like that we are not given the opportunity to respond to Inter Milan's job on us at the San Siro.
Sure,
I'd like to be able to respond to teams that can beat you, because I think that in itself is a bit of a mental benefit when you're able to do that. But then obviously we've played a very different variety of sides. We've gained really positive and quality experience in Europe that has not maybe been available to us in the past, by going to the San Siro, by going to a tough place in Atalanta and Bergamo, and going to, of course, Sporting, a team that have had a narrative over us from knocking us out in the Europa League and win very comfortably. And I think those experiences will be valuable for us going forward.
Yeah, for sure. The only slight downside of last night was the absence of Miles Lewis-Skelly, who apparently picked up a knock in the Aston Villa game. Thought he was okay, was training yesterday, couldn't complete the training session. Mikel Arteta said they're going to do some tests and scans on him today, I think, to find out the extent of that problem. It would be very cruel and almost typical of this season if there was a significant problem for him. Obviously, we're touching wood. I touch my head as well, because that's made of fucking wood as well at times. That isn't the case. That it is, whatever it is only short term. But, it's hard not to worry when you're in a season like this where, A, it feels like you're not getting any rub of the green at all when it comes to injuries, but B, the schedule itself, you know deep down in your heart, is a big part of why we've been struggling, because there are just too many games. We're going to play 9 games in January versus 3 last season. I was at that Dennis Bergkamp event on Sunday night, and I was talking to some Arsenal people there, and they're like, the schedule is just crazy. This is insane. What's being demanded of the players. So we understand why that is a factor, but I'm just keeping everything crossed for Miles Lewis-Skelly, who has been one of the really bright lights of this season, that whatever this isn't going to be too serious.
Yeah, I'm not going to pretend to be a medical expert in anything here. I'm going to go off pure vibes when it comes to discussing kind of this. But if indeed he's come off and he's gone into training and he started training, you'd hope that those signals, while he couldn't finish the session or he wasn't feeling right, isn't an indication that it's something horrendous, and that it's more, maybe it's load, because he's played a lot of football for a player that has not played at this level. So it could be a load-bearing issue, which we hope. But as Arteta said, we got a scan. I got a good feeling about some of the chats I had, but I'm wary of kind of leaning too heavily into them. And hopefully he's going to be okay, because as you rightly say, I think all of the attention was on Ethan Nwaneri this season in terms of being the young star that would break out. And, it's far more exciting to get, enamoured by attacking players that can offer you goals and assists. And, especially a player like Miles Lewis-Skelly, who, came through and developed as a midfielder and is now playing at left back. And Arteta kind of indicated that actually his future seemingly is here, that he saw him playing and thought, no, this inverted left back role suits his style, his physicality, his stature, the strength that he has at such a young age. I saw Max Dowman in training, for Arsenal. It's amazing, kind of the stature of these young guys that are coming through. And Miles Lewis-Skelly has that in abundance. And so it would be, as you say, very cruel if he's taken away from us for an extended period. But hopefully that's not the case.
Hopefully. Let's hope not, because it would be particularly cruel. So look, we have to talk a little bit about transfers and the transfer market, and there is so much focus on Arsenal doing something. And, we say this every time, and I'm sure you say this. I don't know that there's an Arsenal fan out there who doesn't want something to happen, who doesn't want the squad to be strengthened and bolstered in some way, because, we are through, 0.004% might do us down, but we are through to the knockout stages of the Champions League. We have to keep fighting in the Premier League, despite how difficult it looks. We are in second place. And I think when we talk about getting more out of the players that we have, right, as a baseline, perhaps part of the discussion that doesn't really get focused on too much is how, if we bring somebody else in, it might also help us get more out of the players that we have. It's not just about bringing in this guy and all of a sudden he's the hero and he scores the goals and everyone's like, oh, what a masterstroke in transfer activity. You brought this guy in and he's the guy that got you over the line in this competition or that competition or the other. It is about how do we get more out of the players that we have? Is it with what we've got, or is it by bolstering the squad? And I think that is sort of where I'm looking at this window as the opportunity to A, add somebody to the squad, but B, help the players around them. Even Martin Odegaard was talking last night about, you look at the injuries and you think, yeah, we could use a bit of help. But then his captain's head immediately kicked in and said, but look at the players that we have. We've got a lot of quality and, which we all understand. You've got to say that publicly. But, Arteta has said we need some support. Arteta has said we are short there. Odegaard has said we could do with a bit of help, responding to a question. He hasn't just sort of come out and stood on the fucking street with a sign saying, help us, please. We need a striker. But, you can only interpret what these guys say when they face the media in the circumstances in which they do. So it's still there, isn't it? That need is still pressing. But of course, we're just over a week away from the end of the window.
And there's not necessarily, I know there's some noises and there's some names, Cunha and Sesko being those two that are really kind of at the forefront of being talked about. But even then, we're not getting the noises. I'm certainly not hearing that, major steps are being taken, at the moment. As at the time of recording, of course, these things change very, very quickly. That it seems to be that, and as far as I'm aware, Arsenal have been, and fans won't agree because they're not necessarily seeing it, but Arsenal have been very active in kind of their discussions and conversations and assessment of potential targets and looking for something. Arteta could not be more open about how much he would like to bring somebody in. He went as far, I think, when Rio Ferdinand asked him, he said, yes, for sure. Like when asked about signing a player, he could not be more committal. And naturally, when the manager's doing that, the eyes then start to turn towards those behind the manager being... And
above the manager, yeah.
Yeah, above the manager and, the ownership and spending. Now, we know that while PSR is not necessarily restrictive on us, we do know that UEFA financial restrictions are of a kind of... they are aware that they are stricter. And they are aware of not wanting to go too far. And they're aware always of not wanting to stretch beyond their own valuation of players. And not only that valuation of players, but they have such a high bar. I mean, I asked Arteta in a press conference, I think, at the start of January, I said, with it being the January window and the kind of the threshold being so high for players, does that loosen at all in this market? And he said, hopefully not. We can't bring in just bodies. And I don't agree with those that think we just have to bring in numbers, because if you do that, people think it's just about the money, or just about a loan. But it's not just about the money. It's about spots. Because when you fill a spot in a squad and you commit a contract to a player, you're committing that spot. And so you have to think about squad building. You have to think about the players that you're filling those spots with. Arsenal, from my personal, take my journalism hat off and just be an Arsenal fan, I don't think Arsenal can afford to do nothing this window. I think it would be horrendous for Arsenal to have come out of January and into February, because it's a weird time when it ends. I think it's 3rd of Feb?
Is it?
It's a really strange time. I'm talking to Alex Howard, BBC yesterday. I think he mentioned it was 3rd of Feb, 2nd or 3rd of Feb.
Oh, it is, yeah, Monday the 3rd of February, so there's maybe a bit more time than I had thought. I thought it was like the 31st, so yeah, we've 10 days.
Yeah, so there's a little longer, but if we get to the end and we've not added anybody, and there's talk of maybe a European loan being the last resort, if you like, then I think it would be really disappointing, because there is still an opportunity to go somewhere in not just the league, but more so the Champions League. That Newcastle game, it sucked that we lost at home. But we beat Newcastle 4-1 last season at the Emirates. And if you repeat that scoreline at St James's Park, which is a very tough thing to ask to do, but if you can do it, you just in Bournemouth go there and win very handily, it is possible, then suddenly you're in a cup final and you got the benefit of that game being played after the transfer window has closed and you're able to reinforce. So I sincerely hope that we do. In terms of just Sesko and Cunha themselves, Cunha's price tag that they're talking about, I think, is way above what he is as a player, personally. Like, the 80 million suggestions is way more than I would ever dream of paying for him. I'm kind of the 40 to 50 million bracket for Matheus Cunha, personally. Some have suggested 60 could do it. I'm not sure if I'd stretch to that. I don't know about you.
Well, they paid like 45 million for him, so I don't think there's any way they're going to let him go for less than 60.
Yeah. Is he worth 60?
That's the other question. Is he... I don't know. It's so hard, isn't it, to discern player value these days. I mean, is he worth 60 million if he comes in and gets you 10 goals and 5 assists? Absolutely.
Great, of course. But has he ever done that for any club in a certain period? I think he's got, 8 Premier League goals so far, maybe one more.
He is playing for a poor team, so there is that aspect of
Absolutely.
it. People will say.
I think that Sesko, for me, is the one I'd go for. I wrote a piece about it the other day. I said, if you can do it, do it. Because I think that at 20 years of age, he's taken that step from Austria to Germany and it's been seamless for him. I know he's playing in another Red Bull side, but it's still a different league. It's still a much more challenging division, and you're playing not necessarily in the most handily RB Leipzig side of the last 5 years. They're already eliminated from the Champions League, and he's scoring at a really strong rate. Not only that, but if you actually look at his goal per shot, it's very impressive. It's in the high 0.2s per 90, which is good. So I look at that and I think that at 20 years of age, it'll be a significant wage decrease on your established 25, 26-year-old strikers like Isaks and Gyökeres, for instance. And you've got scope for growth there and scope for development. And as we talked about, if you can't sign Mohamed Salah now, you signed the Mohamed Salah when he was at Roma, and maybe Sesko is that. He's the one I look at and go, yeah, maybe he's the guy that we go for.
Yeah, I looked at the Champions League table and I saw RB Leipzig on 3 points and thought, well, maybe it's doable. Then you look at the Bundesliga table, you see Leipzig sitting in 5th.
Yeah.
And you think, if they want to get back into the Champions League next season, selling Sesko at this point, unless it happens quickly and they've got something lined up themselves to bring it in, it's going to be a difficult deal to do on that level. I think I sort of agree with you that if he is a player we wanted last summer and we bid or at least got into ballpark discussions about him last summer, I don't think he's done anything to change our minds about his ability to come in and score goals. It's whether or not we view the extra it might take to get him in January. But if it's a long-term investment and if you believe in the player, then maybe it is the way to go. Maybe you do pay over the odds. Maybe you have to acknowledge that sometimes, despite your best efforts and your best planning and your best strategy, you have to react in a market which isn't necessarily ideal, and that is going to cost you a few extra quid, and then maybe you have to think about doing other things to offset that money. But I don't know. I think it's when you look at those two names, they're the only two that are really doing the rounds. Cunha, because, well, he's a good player and he's on the outs at Wolves, right? He's had some issues there. He seems to have fallen out with the coach, who was talking about him in pretty dismissive terms about his body language and things like that.
Trossard-esque.
Yeah, I was going to just say, there's maybe just shades of Trossard a couple of Januaries ago, although I think Cunha would cost quite a bit more than Trossard did. But it is going to be a difficult one, isn't it? There's nothing obvious, there's nothing obvious and easy where you would say, just go and do that. And that will make everything better, or at least go some way to making it better.
Yeah, absolutely. And, what a lift it would bring. If we in a week's time, we're looking at Benjamin Sesko on the Arsenal website holding up an Arsenal shirt, that would bring a huge lift to the fan base, to the team, the expectation. You can imagine the roar in the crowd bringing on a new signing, not alone, it would be a great sense. And you get the sense that Arteta really wants it and is hoping that what can happen behind the scenes. Do you think that the resignation of Edu and the interim period that Jason Ato is in right now has had any or much or whatever bearing on our business this winter?
I can't say for sure. I think if you're looking at it from the outside, you would say that a club that lost its sporting director and has just got an interim guy in charge while they seek that permanent arrival, like if it happened to another club and they didn't do any business in January, you'd be saying, well, they got that wrong. But I can't say 100%. I think obviously there are good structures in place at Arsenal, and it's not just about Edu. Edu was the front man for an operation that works behind the scenes very, very hard. There's a lot of people. You saw all the videos, right, of when they do that video on deadline day, and Edu would walk around the training ground at London Colney and he'd say, without these guys, without that guy, without that group of people, everybody's on this team working to make things happen. So the absence of one guy shouldn't fundamentally change the way that we operate, but maybe that one guy as somebody with perhaps a bit more authority, right? A bit more influence, which Edu, I think, had above Jason Ato, which is not to be dismissive of him, because he had the job, he had the title, he had the figurehead, he had the experience. Maybe just that might be something that's missing, rather than the ability to do a deal when it comes along. That's the way I would look at it. What about you?
Yeah, I agree. I think Jason Ato is incredibly highly rated, not just at Arsenal, but kind of around kind of the recruitment side of the sport. And he has a good chance of potentially getting the role on a full-time basis as well. There's a number of candidates that are definitely being considered. And despite, there's been suggestions of some being kind of more leading figures in that race, I'm told it's a lot more open still at this stage. There's still not a rush at all to make that decision. And they very much recognise that a lot of the best people for that job are still very much in roles and will be in place, especially during this January period. They're going to be very busy for their respective clubs. So those conversations will, I think, happen more so further down the line. But Jason's got a great opportunity in this kind of period to showcase to the ownership, to Arteta, who is definitely going to have a huge influence on that decision, what he's able to do, and if he's able to bring in those respective players. The amount of times when he's been asked questions, Arteta, in a press conference, he says, that's a question for Jason. And I asked Arteta, actually, if Arteta's role had changed at all since Edu had resigned. And he says, no, Jason has stepped into that position. That is all on him to do those things. So there's a lot of expectation from fans, and I sincerely hope that we are, in an hour's time, seeing a bomb dropped on our social feeds at some point, whether this happens to go out, that something big's going down, madness. Let's hope so. I think we'd be all on board with that. Happening inside the next hour, I'm not 100% sure, but I love your optimism. I love your optimism, Tom. All right, listen, we better leave it there as ever. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you very much. Thank you very much indeed to Tom. You can find him in all the usual social media places, and of course doing his thing over at the Gooner Talk TV on YouTube. And he writes about Arsenal for Football London. The ads are not his fault. Okay, I think we will leave it there for this particular episode. Thank you so much, as always, for being here. We really do appreciate it. Remember that if you want more on the Wolves game, if you want something else to listen to, if you want lots of exclusive content every week, you can join us over on Patreon for just $6 a month. You get instant access to everything that we do there.
We'll have a preview podcast for our game against Wolves tomorrow afternoon. That will be available at patreon.com/Arseblog. So if you're not a member, if you want to help support everything that we do here on Arseblog, just go to patreon.com/Arseblog. You can sign up there. You also get, I think, a 10% discount if you sign up on an annual basis. So maybe that might suit you a little bit better. For now, though, take it easy, folks. We will have an Arsecast extra for you on Sunday this week. Hopefully, it'll be a goodly Sunday morning after we play Wolves on Saturday. For now, though, take it easy, and we will catch you on the next one.
Welcome back to Sky Sports News. And it's been reported this week that Mikel Arteta has taken upon himself to play music to the Arsenal players at training in order to inspire them. But the big question, of course, is what kind of music was Mikel Arteta playing at the Arsenal training ground? We've gone behind the scenes and we can exclusively reveal that the playlist contains tracks by Dua Lipa, Harry Styles, Taylor Swift, Sergio Mendes, The Fine Young Cannibals, and of course, this. Is it coincidence that Arsenal then won their next game 3-0? Probably not. We're going to take a short break. When we return. Breaking news after Gary Neville is arrested for sending abusive DMs to Arsenal set-piece coach.